Welcome to Brave Together Parenting, an empowering and truly helpful podcast for the parents of children with disabilities and all unique needs.
If we live the fullest extent of our beautiful lives, we may age into disability, or it may happen suddenly as it did for me. The more that we prioritize accessibility in our culture, in our built environments, it doesn't have to be so hard.
Welcome to Brave Together Parenting, episode 193. I'm your host, Jessica Pate, brave mom to an adult son with Prader-Willi syndrome, and I'm the founder of the nonprofit organization We Are Brave Together. On this episode, we are speaking to thriving disabled adult Tiffany Yu, who at age 9 was in a tragic car accident which left her paralyzed in one of her arms, and it also took the life of her father. She is now a disability advocate who runs a disability-centered community, creates content, and has a book coming out on disability inclusion and anti-ableism. She has led Diversability, a nonprofit organization, for 15 years. I think you're going to love this interview because what I'm excited about this season is the voice of disabled adults on this podcast. We have so much to learn as caregivers and as non-disabled caregivers. We don't know what it's like to be disabled. And so I think it's really critical to have this voice, these voices on the podcast this season and hopefully going forward. A quick reminder to rate and review this podcast and share episodes with your friends. Follow us on social media and check out our episodes on our We Are Brave Together YouTube channel. Now, please enjoy my conversation with the effervescent, intelligent, and wonderful Tiffany Yu. Hi, Tiffany. Welcome to Brave Together Parenting podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited because this season we have included a voice that we haven't included, and that is of thriving disabled adults. And so I just thank you for taking the time and just being willing to share your story, which I think you're pretty good at. And so why don't we just start by having you tell our listeners a little bit about your story and what brings you here today?
Sure. So my name is Tiffany Yu. I'm the founder and CEO of Diversability. I guess the best way to think of us for your audience is that we're a very large disability-centered community, mainly focused on disabled adults, because I felt like there was a lot of support for parents of disabled kids and older adults who had later in life onset disabilities, but nothing for this in between 20s to 40s group. I'm also the author of the forthcoming book, The Anti-Ableist Manifesto. I have to wave it up to the screen. So my organization, Diversability, we're turning 15 this year. Someone made a joke that I started it in the womb. But over the past 15 years, I've just been asked a lot of questions about how people can better show up for the disability community. And my interest and passion in this space comes from my own lived experience. At the age of 9, I was involved in a car accident where my dad, who was driving, unfortunately passed away. And I acquired a handful of injuries, including permanently paralyzing one of my arms and breaking a couple bones in my leg that then healed, and then much later being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a type of mental health disability.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm so sorry that you lost your dad. I always say we're never ready to lose a parent, and absolutely not ready at 9 years of age. So I'm sorry.
Thank you.
And who else was in the car with you? You had siblings in the car too?
Yeah, so I'm the youngest of 4, and this was on the car ride home from dropping my mom off at the airport. So my dad was driving, one of my sisters and my brother were also in the car. Their stories are not mine to tell, but I often think about how, in many ways, I try to be very sensitive around using the word tragic.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I'm disabled doesn't mean I'm tragic, but I would describe the car accident as something tragic. And recently I had an opportunity to actually curate a YouTube Kids playlist on the Paralympics. And I was writing the draft of kind of my opening video. And then we had a bunch of other videos about different sports and athletes. And I remember in the video having a sentence in there that said, when I was 9, I got into this car accident. I paralyzed my arm and my dad passed away. And the feedback I got was that it was too graphic for kids. And I thought that that was really interesting feedback because this happened to me and I was a kid.
Right,
And
right.
I think what's so fascinating, and in some ways I kind of reflect on that, and I wanted to share that feedback because I just wish some of the things that happen to kids don't happen to kids, like the things that make us grow up too soon.
Right. And I agree with you. And yet I think what you would share on that video to me seems appropriate. I don't believe necessarily in sheltering our kids, that bad things do happen in this world in terms of accidents and loss. So whatever happened with that, did it get pulled?
We adjusted the script. I think the graphic part was, yeah, we just ended up adjusting the script. You can go online and see it and see the playlist. And if you have the YouTube Kids app, you can check out the the playlist there.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. What do you say helped you rise after loss and then experiencing disability for the first time as a 9-year-old?
Yeah, I often describe the events surrounding the car accident as compounded grief. So there is grief of loss, as many of us understand, losing a parent or a loved one. There
Right.
is loss in terms of the changes in my body. I call this disability grief. For those of us who acquire our disabilities or have symptoms that exacerbate or deteriorate over time. And also a type of grief that I would consider the loss of childhood innocence. And so, how did I rise? It took a long time. As the daughter of Asian immigrants, my dad is from Taiwan and my mom is from Vietnam. I had internalized that we shouldn't share anything that might be seen as shameful. So, in my family's cultural background, me now having an apparent disability was seen as shameful. For something like a car accident to happen or for my dad to pass away, in some beliefs, that meant like bad luck somewhere in the ancestral lineage. And so I had internalized, oh, we can't tell anyone about this for fear that we don't want our bad luck to rub off on anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And, I have a lot of compassion for my parents because that's what they grew up believing. And I'm not really I guess I'm here to interrupt that intergenerational belief. But it really took getting to college, which was over almost 10 years after the accident. And while I was there, was almost like this is my first time on my own without my mom. In some ways, like controlling my narrative and trying to protect me in the best way possible. But now I was on my own. So now I had to explain myself because I have this memory, and I've talked about this before, but essentially, after my arm was paralyzed, I still had to get dressed for this mandatory gym class every single day. And every single year, my mom would write me a note that I would hand to the gym teacher that year saying, hey, I don't even know what the note said. I don't even know if I looked at the note. And I always remember the act of handing the note, just watching the PE teacher's facial expression and not even saying anything. And so I feel like once I turned 18 and now was in college, I felt like that was my turn to have my own agency and try and determine what my story was.
Right. And how was that for you?
It was scary. I still remember the date. I'm really into dates. So the car accident was November 29th, 1997. And then the first time that I ever shared the story of the car accident publicly, what I call my disability origin story, was October 22nd, 2009. And I cried. And sometimes when I look at old videos of myself telling the story of the car accident, I also cry. And what's interesting is in those videos, I'm not crying on stage, but I wonder if I've just done a lot of work since then to process all of that. But I feel like the emotional response was two things. One was over a decade of not sharing this story publicly, being seen and validated and witnessed in my grief for the first time. And then the second was just the hard, unprocessed parts of losing a parent and having to like pick up the pieces all over again.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot. It's a lot. And as you say, you have PTSD as a result. And I'm sure it's like double PTSD.
Mm.
It's not just because of being in an accident that was traumatic.
Yeah.
So what do you think, because our audience is parents, is there anything that you wish your mom would have done differently? Again, I know her story is her story, so I don't want you necessarily to speak for her, but when you reflect back, is there anything that you would offer, or is there anything that you wish she understood about your journey? Because,
Mm.
so my community, I'm a caregiver advocate. My community is mainly moms who are caregiving to children with every single diagnosis on there. And we all have blind spots because we don't know what it's like. I don't know what it's like to have my son's rare disease. We don't know what it's like to be disabled. And so looking back, is there anything you wish your mom would have done differently?
In some ways, I feel like who I am today is the result of everything that's happened the way it was. And in other ways, I talk about having been subjected to what I call the alphabet soup of treatments. And that was doctor's appointments, physical therapy, occupational therapy, surgeons, hand surgeons, shoulder neurosurgeons, like acupuncture. And it just internalized a narrative that I needed to be fixed.
Ah,
And I want to highlight some nuance in here, in that if you do believe that some treatment will improve your quality of life, I'm not here to say don't do it, right? And if I look back, I have a feeling that my mom was doing all of that because she did believe it would improve my quality of life. I also think about how, so for the past couple of years, I've been going back to this camp of people who have my injury. And one other way that a paralyzed arm happens is during childbirth, if the doctor pulls out the arm first. So there are a lot of kids there, and then they called us the injured adults, and then you have the injured kids. And I've been going back to the camp, and one of the things I realized was that I could have been eligible for something called an IEP, which maybe you're
yes.
very familiar with.
Absolutely. No, we know it all. Yes.
So
Absolutely, you would have.
I relearned how to write with my non-dominant hand. And I want to say maybe for a few months afterward, I did get extra time, but then it stopped, maybe in the new school year or something. And I kind of look back on that and I don't really remember details, but I definitely know I didn't get extra time like later. Again, having relearned how to write with my non-dominant hand.
Right.
And I look back at that period, and in some ways, my understanding of it is that I guess my mom viewed an IEP, or maybe we weren't aware. Part of it is just the awareness. So maybe we weren't aware that we had access to accommodations. Maybe she didn't want me to seem like I had special treatment, even though accommodations are basic human rights so that we can do the things we need to do. But I look back at that time period and I kind of like laugh sometimes, because in my current state, I feel very comfortable asking for what I need. And I think back to 9-year-old Tiffany or whatever preteen or teenage. And I think like it didn't have to be so hard. It didn't have to be so hard in the sense that I didn't need to pretend that I didn't have a disability. I could have been eligible for protections in place that could have enabled me to perform better. And I actually did okay in school. And when I think about it, I'm like, oh, I did okay because I was taking all these tests and writing all these essays with my non-dominant hand, just trying to be on par and pass by. At the same time, so I'm the youngest of 4. And when my dad passed away, I was 9. The oldest sibling was 14. I also have a lot of compassion that that's a lot for my mom, one person, to have to navigate all of that. And so in a lot of ways, my coping mechanism was just to try and coast by, like not raise my voice or ask for anything that I needed, right? So I don't know if that answered your question, but many things I wish, but also I have a level of compassion and understanding, because even now I'm 36, I go home and my mom is like, do you want any more vegetables? Let me get you the vegetables. Here are the vegetables. Do you want any more vegetables? And I'm just like, I know I'm always going to be her kid, right? And so we don't know how much of that is perhaps a mindset around like, oh, Tiffany has a disability, like she can't do anything. Or is it just, oh, this is my kid and I want to take care of her?
Right. But it's hard probably not to wonder both ways.
Yes. And I think at the same time, at a certain point, I just have to eat the vegetables. It's like, so, and I will acknowledge I'm like a chronic overthinker, chronic overanalyzer, and sometimes it's just okay. It's okay.
Right. Sometimes it just is what it is and it doesn't need analysis. I'm with you. I'm with you. What do you think gave you your voice? Because it sounds like growing up in your household and maybe culturally, you weren't talking about it, right? It wasn't out loud. You weren't living your disability out loud. So what gave you, do you think, did it happen in college? Did it happen after college? Like what gave you your voice to speak up and to do the work that you're doing today, which I greatly admire?
It all came from community. And not only did I start my own community, but in many ways, I see myself as a community builder first. So when I was a freshman in college, I actually co-founded a Taiwanese American club with a couple other Taiwanese American students. And interestingly enough, and I don't get to talk about this that much, but I actually didn't identify as Asian or Taiwanese until I was 18, because I think I had also internalized, oh, your parents are immigrants. Don't draw any attention to yourself. Just try to assimilate because assimilation is your pathway to success. Then I show up at college and I happen to meet who ended up becoming my roommate a couple years later, Jackie. I think one of her parents is from Japan and the other parent is from Taiwan. And she's like, oh, my mom is from Taiwan. I'm like, oh, my dad is from Taiwan. We should start a club. Kind of like you want to find those areas of commonality, right?
Yes.
And so we started the club, and I wanted to share the club because starting the Taiwanese American Club made me find a sense of pride and empowerment in a sense of my identity that I felt shame in, which was being Asian. And I was one of a handful in the town that I grew up in. And so fast forward three years later or 4 years later, the Taiwanese American Club is now flourishing. It's doing really well. And I still hadn't really talked about disability, but I knew how to start a club and I could see the power of creating a community. And my favorite part of this story is that for the first 11 years of Diversability's existence, our logo was created by my Taiwanese American fellow club member. And so this is where solidarity kind of comes into play too. But yeah, where did I find my voice? I think I found it by meeting other people first, learning more about the work that they were doing and how they were using their voice, and then turning the mirror back on myself and saying, okay, what are the areas that I want to focus on? But I would not call myself a disability. I did not set out to become a disability advocate. All I knew how to do was start communities. And I realized how important they were, not only for me. And then once I was in there, I found my voice.
Thank you to everyone who showed up in person or participated virtually in our 5K fundraiser. It was a big success, and we cannot thank this community or our sponsors enough. An extra special thank you goes to our top sponsors, Rise Advocacy, GHJ Foundation, Torrance Memorial Medical Center, CMS Creative Management, the Patay Family, MRM Education, Harbor Light Financial Strategies, and PPL. We are so grateful to these generous sponsors who help make all that we do for this community possible. The retreats we put on for caregiving parents, the connection circles we facilitate, and this podcast, among many more offerings, would not be possible without your support. If you or a business you know is looking to help with our next fundraiser, please go to wearebravetogether.org to find more opportunities to donate or get involved. We will be accepting donations for the 5K fundraiser through October 31st. And then we will follow that up with Giving Tuesday and end of year giving. We welcome your donations and generosity, and we thank you with all of our hearts. How do you think that we change the narrative around disability? And as you say, like mindsets rooted in pity. I appreciated that phrasing. Like, how do you think we change the narrative? I say, because I'm talking to parent caregivers, that if our culture was very, very different surrounding disability, that when a parent receives a diagnosis on their child, it would not be so devastating. But because we know how this world responds, there's, obviously there's several reasons for grief. And we call it disenfranchised grief because it's grief that doesn't like fit in any box. But I just think if we treated the disability community and caregiving community differently, I think we as parents would certainly feel differently when we find out that our child has a diagnosis. Anyways, but what are you doing, or what do you see you and your peers and your colleagues doing? I mean, is there hope to change this narrative? Because I'm with you.
Yeah, I think a couple things come up, which is I love that you quoted me, which was a lot of our narratives are rooted in pity. And one of the ways that I guess ableism really manifests is when people say, I'll help you, but I won't hire you. And it's such a fine line because we're all interdependent. We will all need help and support and assistance sometimes. And that's great. And it's welcome sometimes and appreciated. But when it doesn't go to the next level of I see you as a valued, respected, worthy peer who I want on my team, that's when we know that we still have some work to do. So how does that change? I think to your point around the diagnosis and the feeling of devastation, I actually have a feeling that the devastation is because we haven't prioritized access in our culture. So for example, if I look back at 9-year-old Tiffany and after she had her injury, they were like, hey, IEP, so easy to get, no administrative burden, you know?
Thank you. Yes. Yes.
Like even that process is hard, right? And I'm not a parent, and I'm sure you can articulate this, but there is a part of me that sees that fear or that devastation around having a disabled child, the fact that our world isn't accepting of it yet. I wish that I could, like a lot of people ask me if I could go back to 9-year-old Tiffany, like what I would tell her. But no matter what I want to say to her, it's not going to land in a way that makes her feel better. I think she's going to have to sit, and she did, she's going to have to sit in that hard place, but we also know she's going to get through it and she's going to become really resilient. But all of this to say, I guess two things. One is I have described people who don't have disabilities or non-disabled people in the book as pre-disabled. If we live the fullest extent of our beautiful lives, we may age into disability, or it may happen suddenly as it did for me or your kid. That's not to make anyone scared, but it's to remind them that the more that we prioritize accessibility in our culture, in our built environments, it doesn't have to be so hard. The other thing that comes up, that's more like a tactical thing you can do. The harder part of this work, which is part of why I wrote this book, is the hearts and minds. And there's a piece that went viral, which I wanted to include in my YouTube Kids playlist, but was told it was not age appropriate. It's this video that went viral that features Madison Tevlin, this actress with Down syndrome. And the start of the video says, "Because you assume I don't drink, you don't serve me a drink, so I don't drink." And what is highlighted in that video is the assumptions that we make about disabled people and the disability experience that limit our life outcomes because other people have determined what those are through their own narrow lens. So through the hearts and minds piece, part of me is really pausing and challenging those assumptions, but also having what I like to call more possibility models, which is why I love that you've introduced kind of this part on your podcast, because we are the possibility models for your kids. And every single year that I've gone to the camp for people who have my injury, they put me on a panel of other adults who have brachial plexus injuries. And one is a fashion designer, and one owns a company called a Jam Tram. It's like music karaoke thing. And one is like a sales executive at a big startup. And it's just like, look at, one is a Paralympian, you know, it's like all of these different things. And I really do believe, I guess, tied into the assumptions that if we don't have more visibility and authentic representation of our own narratives, we are going to continue to limit how expansive we are as disabled people. And I think it's changing. And like, I'll use just this very brief example. I think about the example of the person who was a wheelchair user. I think his name was John Hetherington, and he wanted to go to a Beyonce concert. And it just so happened that his wheelchair was like 4 inches too large to get onto the plane to go to the concert. And the Beehive was so angered by that. Like, it went viral on social media, and Beyonce's team saw it, and they ended up inviting him to another concert. They all rallied behind it. All of the headlines said Beehive rallies so fan in wheelchair can go to concert, right? They were all displayed through a pity inspiration lens. When an alternative headline could have been, and I'm not a journalist, so this is not going to be a real headline, but it could have been something like, why is it that in 2024, wheelchair users still can't fly with their mobility devices safely?
Exactly. Exactly.
So it's the same story. It's just portrayed differently, right? And so I think we're starting to see the shifting narratives with the emergence of media like this podcast, with social media. And also, social media is helping people like your kids, your listeners who are parents who have kids, see other people who have their disabilities who are valued, respected.
Right. Yeah. It gives us hope. It gives us inspiration. I mean, even our first guest, who has a very different story than my own son, and my son is going to be dependent 24/7 for the rest of his life. But even after speaking to this guest, it opened me up to think bigger, to dream bigger. Just because Ryan's going to be dependent 24/7 doesn't mean that there isn't a world of possibility still for him to get involved in. It really convicted me. It opened me up. And we just have to continue having your voice on the podcast and everywhere, because it's the only way we're going to bring hope and bring change.
Yeah. And I will say, I think at the same time, like, the community that you're creating and giving visibility and respect for the caregivers and the parents is so important too, because I don't even know if my mom has a community like this of other parents of disabled kids or things like that. And maybe that was a cultural thing too, but it makes me think about just the resource exchange that's happening. And yeah, I really love this word expansion, just like the expansion that happens when you're with each other.
Yes, yes. It helps, one, we feel validated in our experiences and our advocacy as parents, and other parents understand the disenfranchised grief because they experience it too, and that it can be cyclical. When you see your best friend's kids graduating or hitting certain milestones that your own kid will not or might not, I call it the cyclical grief. And, community is so powerful to have people who have shared lived experiences, whatever that is. It's really, really important to be, I say, surrounded by people who get it. It's comforting, it's transformative, and otherwise we live very isolated lives. And that is not good for our mental health. That is not good for our physical health. We have to be in community. And I love that you're a community builder. I'm a community builder as well. And it's really the only way through life. We have to have community.
Yeah. And I think part of why I decided, outside of the Taiwanese American Club, to focus on community is I felt so isolated in my disability experience. And I have a feeling there are many other disabled people out there who feel very alone as well. And what ends up happening is not only do you feel very alone, you feel really disempowered, and it puts you into this like threat state. And then it affects your sense of self-esteem and your self-confidence as well.
What would you recommend for parents who are recognizing how isolated their kids are? How would their kids find community? I think it's easier when kids are littler and cuter, and there's more programs offered for kids. Once your kid is 18, 19, 20, 22 and aging out of the school district, it's very different what is out there. But what would you encourage parents to do for their kids who are isolated?
Yeah, I am a big fan of Facebook groups. I know maybe not that many people use them, but Diversability also exists as a Facebook group. And I will say, for many disabled people, our Diversability Facebook group is the first disability community they're joining. I don't know if it's the SEO, the search engine optimization on Facebook, but I went on there a couple years ago and I typed in brachial plexus injury. That's the name of my injury. And I found this Facebook group that has like 6,000 people in it. And the Facebook group is run by this nonprofit called UBPN, United Brachial Plexus Network. And even just a couple months ago, someone that I know through social media, I told her about this community and she had no idea. And she's had her injury since birth and she's around my age. And so it's just like, I guess I'll say, my hope is even if you do decide not to go the Facebook group route, sometimes we don't want to be on the internet like that. My hope is that you have some kind of community anywhere that you are. And even if it's not like a disability community, maybe it's a sewing community, or I used to be part of a meditation group. I mean, I'm in so many communities now, but depending on how specific the disability is, you would be surprised what groups are out there that are able to support. So not only was this big brachial plexus group through the nonprofit, I also found ones that were specific to people who acquired their brachial plexus injuries not during birth. So the people like later in life. And it manifests differently, two people can have the same diagnosis and it looks very different. And at the same time, I guess I want to share, and this is something just from watching my sister become a parent, like, don't forget about yourself too. Like, make sure, and I don't have any kids, but it has been fascinating now that more of my friends are becoming parents. You do lose a part of your identity, even, I don't know if it's for a short period of time or if it takes 18 years. But yeah, I think this is why I have a lot of compassion for my mom too, because as an angsty 9-year-old, I was maybe angry by certain decisions, but then I'm also just like, my life was totally dependent on her, as were my 3 siblings for a handful of years after something so sudden like that happened, of losing, the other caregiver.
And yes, you raise a great point that parents have to take care of themselves. I'm always giving parents permission to do so, as our whole mission is to preserve and protect the mental health of caregivers. Yes, you have to take care of yourself. Please take care of yourself. But you said something that made me think of something else, and it's gone. So we're going to go right to your book because I want to talk about it before we say goodbye. I've ordered it. Tell our audience all about your book.
Yes. So the book is called The Anti-Ableist Manifesto. I will hold it up again. Looks like this.
Great cover.
It kind of actually, what struck me yesterday is that it kind of matches pumpkin spice season.
Perfect.
It's perfect for fall. Perfect casual reading for fall. It's called The Anti-Ableist Manifesto, Smashing Stereotypes, Forging Change, and Building a Disability Inclusive World. And I wrote this book because, as I mentioned in the intro, Diversibility turns 15 this year. And over the years, I've just gotten so many questions about how we can better show up for the disability community. And I even think about your question, Jessica, about, what we were chatting about earlier, like what needs to happen for things to get better. And I think this is me contributing my voice to this topic. And one of my favorite reviews that I've gotten so far is that it left the reader feeling energized that creating a disability inclusive society is possible. And so if we think about it, and we even think about the conversation we had here, the enormity of the problem, ableism, is huge. But I really do believe that there are small things that will all add up in community with each other into much larger things. And what I tell people, and you probably tell your listeners this too, is maybe you're not showing up at City Hall yet because you've got a house full of kids at home or your health that you need to manage. Take care of yourself first. Make sure your own cup is full, but also know that when you're ready to use your voice, there's a whole group of people who will be there to help cheer you on and help support you, because I don't think that any of this happens alone. And in a lot of ways, I tell people, we wrote this book. Actually, Kelly Coleman, who introduced me to your podcast, there's a part in the book where I wanted some perspective on what happens if a kid sees a disabled kid and makes a comment about it. How do we approach that in the most respectful way? And so it's got perspectives from all different types of advocates, because I also know my disability story is very specific, and I wanted to make sure that all of our voices together give you a sense of where the disability community is now.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Is there anything, well, first of all, where can everybody find your book and find you, Tiffany?
Yeah, so you can find me at the website tiffanyyu.com. It's just my first and last name. And that will have like a link to the book and all the places that you can pre-order or order. And it will also have all of my social media links as well. And I will also share, if you don't want to read a 250-page book, I also started a series on social media called the Anti-Ableism series. And it's really short, bite-sized ways that we can be better allies to disabled people. And it ranges from, hey, here's some language that might be offensive to the disability community and some alternatives you can use instead, to, hey, were you aware that prioritizing disability inclusion is good for your bottom line? Here's the research report. To, I don't know, there's so much. There are 280 parts to the series now, but it's all in a playlist.
My goodness.
If you want to watch that. Yeah.
That's so great. Okay, well, you need to send that to me if you haven't sent that to me, because I would love to link that for sure.
Yeah.
This has been so great. I want to keep talking to you, Tiffany, but it's so great. Maybe because you're in Los Angeles, maybe we could meet in person someday. That would be wonderful. And please tell your
I would
mom,
love that.
Please tell your mom to join We Are Brave Together. We're here for her. I don't know if it feels like it's been too long for her that she hasn't reached out for support or community, but I'd be happy to reach out to her personally.
I love that. I like to think my mom is always watching, because every once in a while I'll get some notes from her with some feedback on something that I've said.
Oh, that's so
But
great.
yeah, I have a feeling she will listen to this or see it when it goes live. And
good. Well, we're waiting for you. Just let her know we're waiting for you. All right, Tiffany. Well, thank you again so much. Thank you for your work and your voice, your writing, your nonprofit, everything that you are doing. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening today. Do us a favor and leave us a review and a rating so that this podcast can get into the ears and the hearts of more and more moms. Did you know that Brave Together Parenting Podcast is an extension of our nonprofit organization, We Are Brave Together? We Are Brave Together serves an international community of caregiving moms, offering support groups that are virtual and in-person, educational resources, and low-cost weekend retreats. And we have published our first anthology of caregiving stories entitled Becoming Brave Together, Heroic, Extraordinary Caregiving Stories from Mothers Hidden in Plain Sight. It will encourage and validate every parent caregiver. To join us today, go to wearebravetogether.org. Our support and sisterhood awaits you. Brave Together Parenting Podcast is for entertainment and education purposes only. It's not a substitute for professional care and should not be relied on for medical or mental health advice. The use of any content on our podcast, links, show notes, or on our website is to be done at your own personal risk. Please seek out a professional to assess your own medical or mental health concerns, because we are all beautifully complex and the content of this podcast is for a broad audience.